All right, we're live.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone.
All right,
All right. All right. I have two different topics. Which one did we decide on?
judge role criterion.
Okay. Yes. What
Yeah, what
qualifies
kinds of
for
it?
judge role? Yeah. Okay. I'm getting a lot of questions about judge role and about another one, which we will cover later this week. But the judge role criterion, a lot of people are asking how high level of an activity do they need to do? Where can they find activities to do? I think a lot of people are now looking beyond doing peer review. Peer review is the gold standard for a judge role activity because it is actually mentioned in the policy manual itself. Since it's mentioned in the policy manual, USCIS pretty much automatically accepts it. They won't all the time accept it. There are some officers who will question some random things or this or that if you do some peer review. But peer review is also not necessarily accessible to a lot of industry professionals. So even though it's the gold standard, a lot of people are looking outside of that norm. There are a lot of competitions or award ceremonies that people go for when they're typically building for an EB-1A profile. So I've seen a bunch of people kind of joke around about the Stevies or the Globies or the Codies. There's all kind of awards where it's something E's. It's the E's awards. And even though a lot of people go for them, I still think that they have some value. They're not going to make an entire case. Like, you're not going to get an EB-1A because you judge the Stevie Awards. It's just not going to happen. It's not that impressive of an activity. But if you can get on the Stevie Review Committee for a particular award or a particular subsection of an award and actually review profiles that are in line with your expertise, it does count for the plain language of the judge criterion. So any kind of industry award like that, where there's an application or a vetting process to be on the judging panel, where that judging panel is comprised of other experts in your field or in a field related to yours, and you are actually judging the work of people in your field. All of that should count for the EB-1A criterion. Aside from that, though, I would be reluctant or hesitant to submit a case where the person has only judged one of these industry awards because it's not mentioned in the policy manual. It's definitely better, even if you get a couple of peer reviews, to do a couple peer reviews combined with that other judging of awards and other such things. But I think it's even better if you get something really niche that is available only within your particular field or area of expertise. Um, some of the most successful judge roles that I think not only go towards satisfying the judge criterion but also go towards final merits are things like you sitting on a committee where you're called on to review best practice guides for the industry, or some kind of standard, like with IEEE. Um, Others might be sitting on some kind of advisory board or an important technical committee, where those positions usually are reserved for top experts in the field. Those kinds of activities, those kinds of judge roles, they not only meet the requirements of the criteria, but they have extra weight. And then as a final class of items, you can judge competitions. Like hackathons are a really big thing right now. There's lots that you can apply for to be on the judging panel, and they do attract a lot of really highly qualified judges. In that group, though, a lot of people are asking me about student competitions. Student competitions, I think, contrary to the way a lot of people think about this, student competitions can actually attract the top judges. The judges of these things are often highly qualified and very prestigious, especially at top universities, who really want the best of the best in the industry judging their students. But since the group of people that are being judged are students and not professionals, USCIS often doesn't allow those to count for the judge role criterion. And the challenge that USCIS usually advances for student competitions is that you're supposed to be judging the work of others in your field, not participating as a judge alongside others in your field, but actually judging the work of others in the field. And USCIS says their students, they haven't really entered the field yet. This is kind of pre-professional work for them. And that's not to say that no competition with students counts. Student competitions that combine students and are also open to industry professionals can actually be really good, because you can argue that you are judging other professionals, even though the students are also allowed to participate. I would also sometimes include the student competitions. Like I said, if there is something particularly prestigious where the panel of judges that's lined up is particularly impressive and you can count yourself among that group, it might be something to highlight. But if you are going to highlight student judging, you definitely need some other elements on your judging profile, like judging competitions or award ceremonies or doing some peer review. Overall, for judge role, it's important that you get, higher level activities. You don't need tons and tons and tons of activities. There's no bright line measure for how many you need to complete, but you do need some that give the indication that you are being invited because of your expertise and because of your standing at the top of the field. So with that in mind, does anyone have questions about the judge role criterion?
So I don't see any questions so far.
Anything that comes up for you, Jason? I know you talk to a lot of people who are looking to just enter this. Anything in particular from them?
So when it comes to judging awards, what kinds of awards should they be? They shouldn't be for students only, right? They should be industry.
So I haven't actually seen student awards, I think, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Although that may start popping up in the EB-1A criteria building or EB-1A profile building space. But yeah, I haven't seen any that are just awards for students. I will just take the opportunity, though, to mention here that winning a student award also does not really count for EB-1A. It might count if it's the most prestigious national student award in your country. But any kind of top college award doesn't count, a research grant, travel grant, none of that counts for EB-1A. And so if you are called on to judge a similar kind of thing for other students, I would think that would not count either. Yeah. One other thing I hear come up in judging a lot is maybe someone has a really good core profile, so they have really good leading role, really good high salary, and they've never thought about judging before, so they're just entering this. And a lot of them are asking, how do I get these judging opportunities? And what they want are these top-level judging opportunities that I'm talking about. Like, they want to be on that advisory board. They want to judge a top award in the industry or the top hackathon in their area. But in order to get there, sometimes you do need to put in the groundwork and do the lower level competitions. Those aren't necessarily going to count for EB-1A right away, but they will open up a lot of opportunities because now you're in the same circles with people who do judge regularly, and they may recommend or talk to you about this or that opportunity. So sometimes to get the opportunities, you do just have to engage a little bit. And if you're starting off and you have no judge roles at all in your profile, judging a student competition can actually be a great way to do that. So think of it a little bit longer term, especially if you're just starting off profile building. Don't think you have to reach for that top opportunity right away. You will need some kind of really good, solid, maybe even top opportunity along the way before you file your EB-1A. But don't get too paralyzed by searching that out and missing the things that are going to help you and get you there along the way.
So we have some questions. Have you noticed a minimum number of peer reviews for research papers for EB-209W and EB-1A?
There's not a minimum number. I think in one case, we only claimed 3 criteria. A judge was one of them, and in that we only submitted 1 instance of judging. It was still approved. And I mean, it was approved because the final merits of the case were so strong. This person was obviously top of her field. It wasn't really arguable. She was definitely top of her field. So you can get away with just doing 1 as long as the rest of the final merits are strong. I do think that that's important. Like, it's an important illustrating case when looking at profile building overall for any criteria, but specifically for judge and for authorship. So for the judge role criterion, USCIS does take a more plain language view, where you can pretty much do whatever you want, and they will check it off the list as long as it meets the plain language. But it's not going to do you any favors for the final merits if your judge roles aren't prestigious or important, and if they don't evidence that you're at the top of your field. So a lot of people are approaching profile building like they need to meet certain minimum thresholds in each criteria that they're developing. And it's not really about that. If you're profile building and you're going for judge role, you just need something that looks reasonable so that USCIS can check it off the list and put that towards your 3 criteria. You can't neglect, though, the final merits of the case. Maybe you don't end up using anything in the judge role for your final merits, but you should make sure there is something in your profile, like some anchor criterion that will solidify the case and get USCIS to approve it, even if you have 2, 3 peer reviews for judge role. So yeah, you don't need to focus all of your efforts on getting more if you're doing profile building. You just need to have a reasonable number and then a good argument for final merits.
He asks, does judging Libby Awards count?
So yes, it counts. Again, it's not going to be the thing that wins the case, not at all. But it does count for judge role. USCIS might challenge it sometimes, saying that it's not really narrowly in your field of expertise or an allied field of expertise. I have seen that challenge quite a bit if someone only submits awards ceremonies for their judging criterion. But judging the Globee Awards can be part of your judge role strategy. So if you can judge the Globies, do 2 peer reviews, and a hackathon, that's actually a really solid judging lineup.
Sandeep asks, let's say someone has a lot of citations but never been as a judge, how to become judge or peer reviewer opportunity?
Yeah, so I don't have the exact formula, but you should be able to reach out to publications where you have published papers, especially if they've been highly cited papers in the past, and just offer your services as a peer reviewer. Some of them will want to invite you to be a formal associate editor, and they'll have sometimes dozens, sometimes even over 100 associate editors credited. And it's great to get that kind of role, because then when a paper rolls around and you are the person who has expertise, they will ask you to review that paper. Sometimes you want to network directly with your co-authors or with your peers, and then see if they have any opportunities, see if they're publishing anywhere that has a call out for peer reviewers. For someone who has published and been cited, they can usually get these opportunities. It's not usually a sticking point. It's when someone's in industry and they have never published and they don't really have any relationship with publishing at all, that's when it can be really tricky to get peer reviews done. It's still possible for that group to get them done through networking, because a lot of scientific researchers, industry researchers want that outside view on their papers. But it is more difficult because it requires a lot more networking at that point. Whereas if you published with the publication before or with the conference before, they're more willing to just say, yeah, of course you can be a reviewer. A lot of times they're desperate for reviewers.
Nikhil asks, can organizing our own hackathon event and being a judge on it count?
So I would say it can. I am a little bit hesitant about it. And that's because you would have a hard time, I think, putting in a lot of the things that USCIS wants to hear. Like they want to hear that you were selected and invited. So if it's your own hackathon, you can't really say that you selected and invited yourself. You would instead just have to compare yourself with the other judges and show that the whole panel is composed of really esteemed experts. So it can work, but I don't love it. I would definitely say have some additional judge opportunities that don't come from you, but are conferred by a third party in your industry.
No other questions?
All right.
So,
go ahead.
I was just going to ask. Judging conference presentations, that counts too, right?
So conference papers. Sometimes there's also positions at conferences where they are judging presentations for best presentation or for some kind of award at the conference. Those committees can count, although those committees are usually derived from the organizing committees. So you'll want to first get on the organizing committee of the conference, and then more opportunities to judge will pop up. But doing peer review for conference papers is very common, especially for industry. You can do peer review for a lot of these conferences without having published before. There's still a vetting process for the judges, and they will make sure that your expertise is aligned with what they're expecting as far as paper submissions are concerned. You may only get 1 or 2 opportunities at first for your first conference, and then it might become a more regular thing as you build those relationships. But yeah, conferences open up tons of opportunities for judging.
Nora asks, in supervising a research capstone and language assessment counts as judge?
It depends. So USCIS in its policy manual says that being on a PhD thesis review committee can count. I don't think all of their officers take that seriously, because I've definitely had that question before, even though it's in the policy manual. And I think the lower you go from there, the more it's likely to be questioned. So if you're supervising a master's thesis capstone project, or doing language assessments for bachelor students, then it's much more likely to be questioned. And I would say you should probably have some other judging opportunities in the mix, just so you can head off some of that questioning.
Deepak asks, is O-1A visa case review lenient than EB-1A, or USCIS value both the same?
I have not noticed a difference in USCIS's application of the rule for O1 and for EB-1A. I will say some officers for EB-1A are much stricter and they don't apply the plain language analysis that they're supposed to apply. But that is contrary to the policy manual and to federal court litigation. So it's just them kind of being rogue agents on their own. As far as the way USCIS normally processes cases, O1 and EB1 on the judge role criterion are almost indistinguishable. So if it qualifies for O1, it should qualify for EB-1A. If it qualifies for EB-1A, it will definitely qualify for O1. Final merits is different. So EB-1A, they will look at final merits overall after they do that judge role analysis, but it doesn't factor necessarily into the criteria analysis itself.
For NIW, is there a list of topics or fields that are of U.S. national importance released by the U.S. government?
So yes and no. There's no definitive list for NIWs themselves. There are some lists, though, that are endorsed in the policy manual. So there's the critical and emerging technologies list. And then there is the multi-agency priorities memo that the White House releases every year. So anything that's on that list or in that memo, it should be considered a national priority kind of automatically. A lot of USCIS officers, though, are getting around that by adding a threshold standard to national importance, and then not saying what that standard is. So they're moving the needle, and it's not necessarily in line with what the DANASAR framework set out, or what I think the AAO intended when it set forth that test.
No other questions?
Yeah. So I do want to talk just a little bit more about what I call the prestige factors in the judge role criterion.
Okay.
Because like I said, it doesn't matter too much for the criterion itself. It really doesn't. But it does matter for overall impressions of your case. Because if you submit a case to USCIS that is clearly built, where maybe you have like a normal software engineer role at a big company, but standard software engineer title, doing work that is arguably critical, but it's not like you individually are driving a major initiative forward. Maybe you have a high salary, and then maybe you did judge, authorship, and media, but judge, authorship, and media are clearly built up for the purpose of EB-1A. USCIS is not going to want to approve that kind of case. In some cases, it will, if officers are just kind of pushing things along, or if they agree and want to approve it, they will. But those cases are really low chance of approval. Because what will happen is USCIS will look through the case and they'll say, sure, plain language, you meet critical role, maybe you meet judge, maybe you meet authorship, but there's nothing compelling in the case to get them to approve it. So if you're in that situation, and maybe you have a role that is arguably critical but also on the line, you do really want some of the ammunition in your other criteria to have those prestige factors. So definitely do all the judge activities that we talked about, but make sure one or two of them really confer the idea of like expertise and recognition in your field. If you don't lay a claim to a super critical role at your company, or if you can't lay claim to an original contribution through some kind of impressive patent or impressive paper that's highly cited, you can still get EB-1A by showing that you have industry contribution and participation. In judge role, what that looks like is you serving in a top role for a top journal or a top committee or a top organization, where you are kind of judging and setting the tone and the pace for that prestigious organization. Like being the chief editor or assistant chief editor of a journal looks fantastic, especially if it's a good level journal. Being the committee head looks great if it's an important committee. And then like being on an advisory board where everyone else is super senior, has very apparent expertise and all of that, that also looks good. So use the prestige factors wisely. Some of you will need them because you don't have a lot in your case. Others will not need them. But regardless, anytime you build up some of those prestige factors, it helps the approval rates on your case.
Mayor has a question. I peer-reviewed around 10 journal papers from one journal, run 8 conference papers from 2 different conferences, reviewed 4 projects for funding proposals, etc. Do you think all of these would suffice judging criteria?
Yes, that's a strong judging criteria. Now, that's not to say it's a strong case. I would definitely want to look at the case as a whole in order to make that determination. But it's not like you need more judge roles at this point in order to get that ticked off the list and towards EB-1A approval. It's definitely sufficient in that it meets the plain language. It's definitely in line with what USCIS envisions. And it's not like adding more to that's going to make it stronger, unless what you're adding is one of those 1 or 2 very prestigious judge roles. That's what would make the criterion stronger for you.
No other questions?
All right. Anything else we should talk about for judge role? I think that's all I have.
Yep. Yeah, we can cover this topic again too.
Yeah, we'll definitely cover it again. That's kind of the trends of what I've been seeing and what's come up. Yeah, so keep in mind, when you're doing judge role, do the things that work. So do peer review, do competitions, do hackathons, do awards. but also pay attention to the prestige factors and how it's shaping your case overall and what the benefit is for your case. This is a criterion that almost anyone who's engaged in profile building will do, because it's one of those that's easy to get opportunities. It's easy to demonstrate that you have been invited on the basis of your expertise, and it's easy to win, at least if you have reasonable expertise and experience. It is going to be very difficult for those of you just starting out, so you may have to take some of those student competitions and kind of work your way up. But once you are ready to think about filing the EB-1A in earnest, within the next 6 months or so, this is the criterion to really focus on.
So just one last question. And I think not sure if you already covered this, but I'm graduating with MS this summer and looking to get into peer review opportunities. How do I get those reviewing opportunities?
So if you're graduating with a master's, I would actually network with your professors. Your professors should have some opportunities. I would also network with other students and see where they're publishing, and then see if those publications need volunteers for peer review, and so on and so forth.
Right, I think we have to end the stream there since we have something else coming up.
All right. Thank you,
everyone. All right, thanks, everyone.
Mm-hmm.